Welcome to the Dylan Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Sessler, and my co-host is Kyle Zahn.
How you guys doing?
We're here to help change the world. Yeah, we're here to change the world and change how the world looks at mental health, self-development, overcoming adversity, all the great things. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 7, and we're going to be talking about our favorite books and
Yeah.
how they've impacted our lives. And we've got some good stuff coming for
It's
you.
a lot of meat in these books too. A lot of things you could take away from them. It's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, who wants to start? Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start?
I mean, you can start with your favorite, your top one. We'll go from there.
Okay. Well, let's do this. You go, or I'll go first, and I'm
Yeah.
going to start with my bottom.
Your bottom, I like it.
And so if you want to stick around for the best books, they're coming at the end. So you got to
I like
pay
that.
attention.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I've got 4. I didn't do a top 3. I did a top 4.
Okay.
Because Kyle's got one of my top 5. So I only did 4. So my 4th favorite book, and it's kind of, I didn't really order them, but number 4 is Coherence, The Secret Science of Brilliant Leadership by Alan Watkins. Now, this book, and to give some context, this book is not necessarily a mental health focus. It's a leadership focus, obviously by the title. But it's a very cognitive focused book, and it really dives into understanding the physiological understanding of the body. I think a little bit in mental health, but very much so in leadership. And obviously, I think by now, if this is not your first podcast episode you've watched, you know that leadership is very fundamental to me as a way to manage mental health. Right, good leaders can manage their people's mental health if they really want to. I mean, Kyle, that's
Right.
what I do.
I've spent months with you, so
right. Like I don't want to, as a leader, I don't ever want to put too much on people, and I at least want to make it fair. Like if you're going to go through it, I'm going to go through it with you so that you understand that you're not in this alone. And Coherence talks about that. It gives you a really big picture, and then it gives you the physiological picture of what that looks like. Right? It talks about the heart. It talks about the brain. It talks about the senses, and it's really it's really powerful because it has, it's where I learned the heart has 5,000 times more electromagnetic energy than any other organ in the human body. That means we actually have a measurable effect on other people. That's really powerful. It's like when you walk into a room, if you're a bad person, you're going to have a really powerful effect on people. People aren't going to like you. And if you're a positive person, and if you're a very powerfully positive person, people you walk into the room and people know, like, oh yeah, this guy's awesome. Let's go. Right? Like people their reputation precedes them is kind of a way to look at this book. And I think it's really powerful when you start paying attention to, really fundamental things about the human body. You really learn to impact people on a different level. And that's really what Coherence is all about. And it's not my top book, but it's certainly one of the books that really changed my perspective about how I deal with people, how I work with people, how I talk to people, everything. Have you read it?
sure. And that's a book that I'm gonna have to lead. I'm gonna have to get into it because I've never read that one.
Yeah. Oh man.
So
I recommend I absolutely recommend getting into that book. It almost feels, it's interesting because it feels like a textbook at times, but it also feels like it certainly feels like a self-development leadership book, but there are certainly parts of it where it's like, I mean, he's I want to say a neuroscientist or a neurosurgeon, somewhere in there. And he,
neurologist of some sort.
no, I think he's actually neuroscientist. I want to say, I could be wrong. Someone fact check
Okay.
me. But I mean, he's he's incredibly intelligent, and the book can get kind of winded. But if you, for me, it took me 5 to 6 months because it wasn't on Audible at the time. I don't think it is still. And I had to go through it in
Mm.
bite-sized segments. I had to go through like 4, 5, 10 pages at a time max, just so I could let it all sink in and then move on. I mean, it's a deep
Sounds,
book.
yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So that's just
Interesting.
one thing to keep in mind. Just take your time with that book. It's a deep one. But
Sure, I gotcha.
what's your number 3?
So my number 3 was The Body Keeps Score.
Okay.
I've I haven't dived enough into it, but from what I've listened to so far on Audible, really speaks to many people as a whole on how, if you neglect your body enough,
Mhm.
whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, it's going to catch up with you and kind of bite you in the ass in a sense. And it's going to
Absolutely.
kind of make you feel like you're buried.
Absolutely.
And it brings you through kind of how to manage that, and it's
Right.
been pretty powerful from what I've read so far.
I'm not going to say too much because
Okay.
The Body Keeps the Score might be on my list, and I don't want to give it all away until we get to the end there.
Meat and potatoes. I got you.
How far have you gotten into it?
Oh boy. So it was more or less one of the first books I've read, and that was before I read one of the other books that isn't going to be farther down the line here.
Yeah.
But I would say more or less, man, I think I got to chapter 3, and I can't remember for the life of me where that ended off, but I remember just like, how do I explain that? Where she's telling you how to um pick up on certain cues with your body.
Yeah.
So
Sure. Yeah, you really haven't gotten much into it. That
no,
that's the first few chapters really, I think, Bessel van der Kolk is really kind of giving a synopsis of trauma
mm,
realistically.
yep,
He's not doing a whole lot until about, I want to say, chapter 5, 6, or 7, one of those.
sure.
That's when things are like eye opening. You know, I mean, there's so much to it. Like, and again, it kind of feels like a textbook in some ways, but again, I'm not going to say too much until I get to it.
It feels like I almost did myself a disservice stopping so soon.
You did, like, trust me. And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, I got you.
My next book is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Now, this book really, really interesting.
Hmm.
And it takes a standpoint that I didn't expect I would enjoy as much. It's actually a more recent book that I listened to. I want to say late last year is when I finished it.
Sure.
So Jordan Peterson, I will say, is is an idol of mine. I mean, he is such a powerful speaker. He is not afraid to share emotions. I mean, if you've ever watched some of his content on YouTube, on TikTok, he'll talk about, like, when he talks about his kids or parenting, um he hits him in the feels, and he powers through it, and he expresses himself, and he shares, the really powerful things that people need to hear. And he's not afraid to step out and say the obvious taboo things, right? Which is obviously very similar to me. So I love the man. I greatly appreciate what he does and what he's really done with the mental health space. And I think mostly I think he really speaks to men, right? And young men. Um, but his book is very much focused around theology and religion, and it's very different for me because that's not my focus. It's not something I have a deep background in. I don't have deep feelings in that space. And I was surprised because but he doesn't come at it from like, here's this religion, you have to follow it. He comes at it from, here's how religion expresses these fundamental understandings. And he gives you the 12 rules that have allowed him, like he's studied religion and all of these, different religions, not just Christianity, not just Islam. He's gone into Buddhism and like Hinduism and all these things. Like he goes into like deep
Yeah.
religion, right? Um, I'm gonna read just some of the rules
Yeah.
that he, because they're pretty much just chapters. But so 12 rules. One, stand up straight with your shoulders back. And when he says things like this, like they mean so much more, right? Like you couldn't honestly read some of these chapters names and understand what they're talking about until you read the book. It's crazy.
Hmm.
He's such an intelligent man, so deep, so powerful. Two, treat yourself like you are someone you are responsible for helping. Honestly, I mean, let me repeat that for
Yeah.
the people in the back, right? Treat yourself like you are someone you are responsible for helping. How powerful is that? I think that's just so important to really think about these days, and it's something that obviously we've been talking about. Number three, make friends with people who want the best for you. Simple, right?
Too easy.
Um, compare yourself with who you were yesterday, not with who someone else is today. I mean, these chapters, right? Uh, Number five, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. I love it, right?
Yeah.
Like I absolutely love that because, if you allow your children to do that, if you allow your children to do things that you dislike them for, your relationship is going to suffer in the end.
Yeah.
It's just a problem. That doesn't mean you have to like put them in child jail, right? That's not what it's really about. And getting into the chapter, you really begin to realize that. But six, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. How many people in the world don't do that?
Almost everybody, honestly. It's crazy. You can think about that in so many ways. How can you judge people or assume their lives when your life is in shambles itself?
Yeah, that's why I don't judge people. I don't
Yeah.
have like I've been through so much. Like, there's no point. Like, at, at, at some point in my life, I've done it. I've made the
Mm-hmm.
mistake. I've been the
Yup.
problem. There's no point in sitting here being, you know, I'm this perfect representation of a human being. Fucking wrong. Like,
There's no such thing.
I've made mistakes and I've been the one that makes mistakes and
Mhm.
and I'm going to make more mistakes.
Right.
So why should I be allowed to judge people? It's not right, you know?
It's unreasonable.
Right. So here's number seven, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Love it.
Ooh.
Number eight, tell the truth or at least don't lie. Number nine, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, that
oh,
one's
it's
good.
classic.
Yep.
10, be precise in your speech. Something something that I live by, right? Like so many of these rules are just things that I naturally built over the years, but I
Mhm.
mean, reading these back is just so powerful. 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. That's a good chapter. I actually really like that one. It really gives you it's a really good perspective to think about because um he talks about how cities would actually put in like skateboarding like stops, right? Like they would put, there'd be benches and stuff and they would rough up the benches like aesthetically so that the skateboarders couldn't use them to, grind on and do their
Oh.
tricks, you know. But what they actually did was they created an aesthetically displeasing city and also infuriated the children that used used to use it.
Right.
And then it's just it's very perspective ridden
Hmm.
chapter, and I love that one. 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. I don't remember what that one's about, but I'm sure it's good.
I like it. I like it.
But I mean, the book is it's good. It's really good, and he's a psychologist, very intelligent. So like he basically could be a history teacher too. I mean, he knows that much about psychology. He just knows that much about history and theology. Very powerful book, and even if you are not religious, still a very good book,
Yeah.
right? And if even if you are religious, still a very good book. It just puts a lot of things in context and gives you a
Sure.
lot of understanding.
And one of the things that I've taken away from your little synopsis of this book so far is that this man goes about his business with passion.
Oh man, I mean it's not even. Yeah, I can't even argue at any point that I've ever seen his content or seen him. Absolutely no question. The man is passionate
Mhm.
about showing people a better way forward. And I love that about him.
That's awesome. All right. Well, my next book would have been, let's see here. Yeah, my second best book that I had on my list. Start with Why by Simon Sinek.
I recommended that one to you.
Yep. And I binge read this book pretty much on missions when
Yep.
we had breaks. And basically, it's more of a business focus, but it's also a kind of, all right, you should tailor it in your life some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
Don't start with what, but start with why.
Hmm.
Like give it a purpose. Give everything you're doing a purpose, and people will see that and eventually buy into it.
Right. Yeah, and not just buy in, but like it,
Believe it.
believe, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the real, with Simon, it's really about showing people you're genuine about what you care about,
It's
right?
authenticity at that point.
Yeah, so like when you step into this, and it's about business leadership more specifically. It's a great book. um it's not necessarily mental health focused, but it really does provide some implications
Mm-hmm.
to understand mental health through that context.
Right.
um and it's about showing people you care, right? Like he gives a couple talks about empathy, and they're very good. I think he's changed a little bit of his narrative recently. I've seen some of his YouTube content lately, and I can't remember what he changed, but it'd be worth looking into.
Sure.
But empathy is a big focus for him, and rightly so, because when you show people empathy, through accountability, not just like flat out, empathy of like you can do whatever you want now. I still have to hold you to your duties in some circumstances, but I'm also willing to work with you to help you get to a better position. Um, it really changes how people respond, and I think I did a weekly wisdom a couple of days ago, really talking about interaction, and showing respect and showing appreciation for people rather than going by the old adage of respect is earned. I think that's a remarkably toxic
Yeah.
leadership style, or just interaction style. And I think Simon would probably agree that respect is given, first, is probably a far more conducive ideal. But overall, I mean, I think Start with Why is a very good book to really develop your pursuit for what you want, and give you a good baseline.
Yep. And I would definitely take that away for sure. It's a stepping stone to how and kind of defining what you want to become and kind of the steps to get there.
Yep.
So
Yep. So my next book is The Body Keeps the Score. Right?
Yeah.
Weird, funny how that works. Now the Body Keeps the Score is, realistically my Bible of how I recommend it. If there was something that I wanted every person that's ever been through trauma to read, it's The Body Keeps the Score. It's not the perfect book. It's becoming a little, I would say it's becoming a little outdated by, I think it was written in 2012, somewhere around there. So, 2015. So, it's not completely outdated. Certainly it still has a lot of relevance, but there's new stuff out there already. And it's crazy how fast this stuff is moving.
Right.
But Bessel van der Kolk is, I think, the epitome of the right kind of I'm sorry, not sociologist, psychologist, right? He's the kind of doctor that really focuses on holistic healing with the addition of medication, with the addition of you know different kinds of therapies, not this hyper focused medication focus or therapy focus. It's understanding the body and understanding how we can get to the core of the body's needs, for healing trauma. um it's not it's not a anti-medicine discussion, although it does have some undertones of, disagreeing with how
Right. Right.
medication has been utilized. It's not an anti-talk therapy or anything like that. It's a book that brings together how to really look at trauma, and then how to look at, treatment of trauma. And I think he nails it. I think it's just a book that can really open people's perspective to how to understand trauma and how to treat trauma. And I think a lot of people are missing out if they haven't read this book and you've been through trauma, because it talks about therapy, it talks about EMDR, it talks about neurofeedback, it talks about these things, these practices that have not been focused on traditionally by the mental health field. It talks about these, different insights from his career of situations that taught him how to help people, and taught him how to really look at people with trauma rather than just, you know diagnose and go, right? Which is
Right.
kind of what it seems like nowadays, is that, I and I feel like sometimes I get people thinking that I give, I hate the mental health field. I don't.
No.
um but I could see where that comes across sometimes. I disagree with how the mental health field, not everybody, obviously, but there are certain practices in place that I disagree with, like prescribing medication before really understanding who this person is. I have a fundamental issue with that, because I get the people, that come to my sessions and are like, I had this experience with a doctor. They just didn't care, right? They didn't show empathy. They didn't show compassion. They didn't show an understanding of what I went through. They just wanted to prescribe me medication without explaining to me what this does, why it does it, why we're going this way. They didn't do the kind of, um, the tests that would show this is the right one for you. It's just this blind medication, um, kind of therapy, and it
Right.
bothers me, right? Because it harms people, and that's what I disagree with. I don't disagree with the entire mental health field. you
Sure.
know I have a disagreement with how medication is prescribed. I have a disagreement with how we look at mental health in general. I think the DSM might be a problem, because we're calling all of these things disorders. We had this discussion about depression.
Right.
We're calling all of these things disorders, and we're showing people, we're telling people in some ways that you will never get over your depression, you will never get over your trauma, you will never get over your PTSD. And whether that's honest or not, I think it's the wrong answer. And we could go back to, I think, we're going to go to your number one book. And I want to kind of touch back on that when we get to
Sure.
get to that book, because yeah, I'm going to table that part, but pay attention when we get to your number one book, which is next.
Right.
And I'll kind of express that, but The Body Keeps the Score. Arguably it's the first book that I usually recommend. And then my
Sure.
number one is the second, but there's a reason for that. So now I'll explain that in a minute.
Yeah, no worries. No, so with piggybacking off of your I guess your vision or your idea of how the mental health field is going right now, it just seems like there's a lot of people in the mental health field that it's almost disheartening that they don't put enough effort into actually learning who their clients are.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to like say,
Yeah.
like that people aren't putting enough effort in. And because realistically, like, it's overburdened. Like, everyone's struggling right now, and everybody's been struggling. And like, I understand from my point, where helping people has been my job for quite some time now. um I'm certainly not a therapist or a psychologist, or any kind of counselor. I'm a mental health coach, is what I call myself, or a life coach, if you want to,
Yeah,
kind of, the concept. um I get it. It's hard, but doing something hard is not an excuse to do it poorly,
exactly.
right? Like, that's the thing, is like, we do have to maintain accountability for the job that we ourselves have stepped into. And if you're not able to do it to the best of your ability, you need to address that, right? Like, if it comes to a point where I cannot do my job, right, and conduct my business with the utmost respect and the utmost dignity and the utmost ability to support other people, as a business owner, I'm going to take a step back and say, how can I do better? Or, you know, do I have to step away from this? Right? Because at the end of the day, if I don't have good mental health, it goes back to the 12 rules for life, right? Clean your house before you criticize the world. Like, I shouldn't, I shouldn't be allowed to sit in front of people with poor mental health, a poor mindset and a poor attitude, and look at people and tell them to do what I'm not doing.
Mhm.
That's not fair to them, and it's certainly not fair to me. Um, so I question the accountability of the mental health field sometimes. Not everybody. I know there's certainly some great doctors out there. I follow one on TikTok. I want to say Dr. Shepard. She's incredible. She's been through difficult things herself, and yet she steps out and constantly is helping people. I love her. She's amazing. I want to get her on the podcast at some point.
That'd be awesome.
But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's a hard thing to say, because I'm not hating on the mental health field, but I'm holding people accountable to their job, you know?
Yep. And we got to hold each other accountable, because if there's no checks or balances, who knows what could possibly happen. And it's unfortunate.
You're going to hurt people,
Yeah.
especially in this job, right? It is so simple. A book that's not on my list, but a book that would probably make the top 10, Trauma and Memory,
Mm.
by Peter Levine. As a therapist, as a counselor, even a mental health coach like myself, if you ask the wrong question in the wrong context, you can hurt people. right? Like you can trigger people very, very, very poor, like very badly.
Yeah.
And you've got to be very careful about like 12 rules for life, right? Like choose your words very precisely, because if you choose them wrong and you give it to the wrong person, you're going to hurt people, and yeah.
Goes back to our communication podcast last week.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
crazy. Like you could set someone off by saying the wrong thing or saying it the wrong way.
Yeah.
Just once.
Miscommunications are, I think, the bane of all relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so many relationships out there are just simple, simple failures to communicate, or miscommunications, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to call them. I think so much of that is, it's that simple. Um, Others are fundamental issues, but I think miscommunication is just such a massive issue.
Sure. I agree with that.
Yeah. So, final books. What's yours? Even though I already know.
So yeah. My favorite book of all time would be It Takes What It Takes by Trevor Moawad. Breaks it down super fundamental, like no shit. If you're in a bad place, you can't go from a bad place to a good place all right away. You have to train yourself to go from negative thinking to neutral thinking first. Stop worrying about the past because it's already happened. You can learn from it, but don't let it bury you. You don't worry about the future so much because it hasn't happened yet. What you have to do is set up your present the best way possible for you to have a successful future, a positive future. So that's like the first big part of that book. The second part is like taking action on certain problems that you're having in your life. It's
Mhm.
like a 4-step process. You identify a problem, you see what you can change within that problem. I think we've had this discussion before in the past.
Yep.
And then how do I explain that? It goes identify, uh, help me out with this. I think it's a 4-step problem.
I read it a while ago.
Okay, that's
So I
fair.
I don't remember the process, the step
Sure,
process.
sure.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm gonna break it down into 3. It's more of an identify the problem you're having, um, taking the pieces that are fixable within that problem, and oh, there it is, identifying risks within those problems and then taking action. And
Mhm.
it tells you that so many people get to that point, that step 3, and don't make the jump to step 4 because of the uncertainties or the scare of it itself.
Yep. Right. And it's not much different than my own kind of process, right? Like my process is evaluate your problem, right? Define what it is that you're actually facing, and then isolate what you can control,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like isolate the things, the very simple things that you actually can control and make an impact with. Everything else you set aside, and you don't
Don't
give
worry
your
about
attention to
it.
it, right? Like you can't, and then you act. You inspire, you motivate, you encourage yourself to make action on the things that you've isolated, and you make a difference. You do something about it.
Right.
And if you whatever you're hung up on in that process, that's where you have to start focusing your mental energy. But let me digress, because that's my book. That's not Trevor Moawad's book. Um, Trevor Moawad's awesome, but
Mhm.
here's the issue, because I have so many followers. Most of them are females, and they're not sports fans, right? They're
Right,
not
right.
they're not sports focused. Trevor Moawad's book is sports focused, right? He talks about Russell Wilson. He talks about his time as I think he's a mindset coach or a performance coach,
Yep.
for the NFL, the NBA, professional level teams. So it's going to turn some people off. It's going to kind of turn some people away, because they're not going to understand the lingo, or the setting. But here's the thing about books, right? Coherence. It takes what it takes. A number of other books, right? Regardless of whether these books are mental health focused or not, it's not about where they're placed. It's about understanding how to take out information that applies to your situation. Right.
Hmm.
This is something that I've been so good at for so long that it's allowed me to get to this point where I can, like, I'm 31. I'm speaking on things that 45-year-olds don't understand, 50-year-olds don't understand yet. Right. This is it. It's about looking at the the situation that you have in front of you, and if that's a book about sports performance, it's a book about sports performance, right? And taking out the golden nuggets that you're seeing in there and applying them to yourself in your own manner, right? Like
Right.
Trevor Mawad doesn't know shit about you, doesn't know shit about me, doesn't know shit about Kyle, right? But he knows people because he's a performance coach. So whether or not he's talking about Russell Wilson or yourself or me or Kyle, he understands people, and that's the important fact. Simon Sinek, business, right? He may understand Amazon, he may understand Southwest Airlines, but guess what he really understands? People, right? It's no different than Bessel van der Kolk talking about people that have gone through trauma. People, right? When you read a book, are you reading it for the context or are you reading it for the information you can take out of it? That's how I look at this, because so many people will look at the context of Trevor Mawad's book. They'll look at the context of Simon Sinek's book. They'll look at the context of Alan Watkins with Coherence, and they'll look at it and be like, I'm not interested in business. I'm not interested in sports. I'm not interested in leadership. And they'll
It's
miss
almost, yeah.
they'll miss so much, right? They'll miss so much information that you can take and actually apply to mental health. You can apply to your life, right? Like 12 rules for life is literally about life, but if you look at it and you're like, I'm not interested in talking about religion, you're going to miss out on the information that can really give you a step up, an edge on the people around you, on the problems that you're going to face.
Hmm.
So, that's one thing that I kind of wanted to address with It Takes What It Takes, because it's a sports focused book, but there's so much to it. And,
Yeah.
and if you really dive into it and force yourself to learn, man, it's good. It's
Yeah.
so good.
And then if you think about it too, with the mental blocks that people put on it because it doesn't really interest them right off the bat, it's going back to like judging things before you actually
Yep.
get a full idea of what's actually coming at you.
Right.
Um, with those mental blocks that they have, they're losing out on so much value that they could have had without having an open mind. You never get that value.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's literally part of what Trevor's talking about in his book, right?
Mhm.
This shift from negative to neutral to positive. It's if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it. It's it, right? It's basically the golden rule kind of thing. Like, if treat others how you want to be treating. Well, imagine treating yourself how you want to be treated. That's it. Like, don't be negative to yourself.
Right.
If you can't be positive, then don't be positive. But if you have a lot of negative, just don't be negative. Just don't do it. Don't say it. Don't talk about it, because and this is from his book, every negative thought is 7 times more powerful than positive thoughts,
Yeah.
which means that every time you say, God damn, I suck. Oh, I'm terrible. I'm worthless. I'm a piece of shit. Every time you say that stuff, you need to do 7 times more positive reaction to negate
Just
that.
just to be neutral.
And it's not enough. You'll never do enough positive, right? But if you do too much negative, guess what? You're fucked, right? And you won't even know. Like, I literally sent out a text yesterday, and I want to bring that up. I sent out a text yesterday, and obviously people are going to be seeing this in a couple days. Um, and here it is. Your negative thoughts will cut deeper than any knife, but you won't even recognize you're hurting yourself. If you want to find peace, healing, or happiness, everything starts with the words and the thoughts you are willing to allow. And if you sit there and allow these negative thoughts to prosper, you won't even know that you're destroying yourself. You're crushing yourself. You're defeating yourself. And until you really take a step back and look at what you're creating within your mind and within your thoughts and within your habits, it, you'll just continue down this road of self-destruction that doesn't look like self-destruction. It looks like other people are putting expectations on you, and other people are judging you, and it look like everybody else is doing it to you, but realistically, you're doing it to yourself. You're destroying yourself, and you've got to stop, right? Like, you don't have to change it, right? You don't have to become, positive Polly over there. All you have to do is stop being negative. Stop saying it. Stop verbalizing. If you can't think about it, just don't verbalize it, because that's
Right.
worse,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and this is what Trevor talks about in his book, and it's super profound. When you really dive into it, it's really powerful.
I couldn't have said that better myself, honestly. So that's good.
Yeah, and there's that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the book, right? I really do, and I think it's, if you can get through the sports part. I'm not an avid sports fan, but I like sports.
Yeah.
Um, when you can really get past that context, if you have a problem with it, it's so good. But my number one book, I don't recommend this first anymore, though. That's the thing. It
Mm-hmm.
may be my number one book, but it's not my first recommendation, especially if you've been through trauma. Um, it's Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And if
Yep.
you've been following me for a while, you've probably read it. You've probably, looked into it. But if you haven't, here's the thing. Peter Levine is a somatic uh, therapist, psychologist, just an incredible person. What somatic really means is body focused. He's going to reconnect you in your mind with your body, because and this book taught me so much, right? This book was recommended to me when I went to my first like massage. I went to like a massage for the first time. My wife was like, I'm getting you a massage. You're looking rough. I'm like, I'm gonna buy you your first professional massage and you're gonna go to it. I'm like, okay. And the massage therapist was like, have you ever read this? Because I told her a little bit about what I do, and how I'm writing my own book. And she's like, have you ever read this book? And I'm like, no, but I'm gonna look into it. Well, it sounds awesome. And I read it and I'm just like blown away. This book is about trauma, but it's about renegotiating trauma. It's about creating a new narrative, right? Because the body experiences trauma differently than the body or the mind experiences trauma. The mind will compartmentalize it. It will place it in different, you know, memory locations, and it's all fragmented. The body doesn't do that. The body has its own memory system, and it's called procedural memory. That's what Peter Levine, discusses. This procedural memory is a habit. It looks like a habit. Sometimes it looks like a tick. Sometimes people that have been through trauma will also be diagnosed with like Tourette's, because they'll have ticks like that. They'll have, responses to different emotions and situations where they'll do it constantly. Procedural memory, though, is a categorization almost, right? So when you go through something that feels threatening or is fearful or is disturbing or is distressing, any of these things that trauma is, the body will categorize that. And think about it, if you go through it at a young age, it'll categorize that for the rest of your life, maybe. And if you don't process through that, right? If you don't kind of, almost like an exposure therapy, a re-exposure therapy, where you work your way through that exposure and renegotiate and kind of clarify what that is, right? A cat could be a traumatic event to a 3-year-old, right? Claws going everywhere, slapping a kid at 3 years old, so that, 15 years later, that person hates cats. And every time they see a cat, they get scared, or a dog, right? Like, very similar, right? If you've had a bad experience with a dog at a young age, you're going to have a procedural memory that is, you see a dog, there's an automatic bodily response to that dog. Or if you hear one, or if you smell one, or if you feel something, right? Like spiders, right? You feel
Yeah.
something crawling on your skin, everybody freaks out, unless you've created the procedural memory of it's fine, right? Unless you're like, the I don't what's that guy on TikTok that does like all the crazy animals? He's basically like Steve Irwin renewed.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Oh,
like there's this procedural memory, and this is kind of what Waking the Tiger is all about. It's about renegotiating that procedural memory to become not a threat, because the amygdala, right, the part of the brain that actually determines what you do under threat, right, the fight, flight, freeze, feign responses, um, those are automatic. They're not a logic based system. They actually cut off the logic, right? The neocortex is after the amygdala. So if the amygdala are getting the bodily response and the emotions from what you're feeling around you to your amygdala have this procedural memory, categorization figured out, that if it feels something that it thinks is a threat, if it's categorized as a threat, it's going to respond accordingly. Now, if you live in a constant state of threat, that's really uncomfortable.
hmm.
It's really painful because your body is using up everything all the time, and you can't get any comfort. You can't live like that. You eventually will, ultimately just self destruct more often than not. So, the Waking the Tiger is a somatic experiencing therapy almost. It talks about how you can reconnect with your body, how you can walk yourself through these experiences. You don't have to remember them, but how you can walk yourself through how you see different experiences, and work through this trauma, through renegotiation, and kind of rebuilding the perspective and the procedural memory and all that stuff. It's very powerful, very profound, but I think The Body Keeps the Score gives a background that supports it. So that's why I recommend The Body Keeps the Score first, Waking the Tiger second, and then you can read every book on my list if you want to.
I
But
got you.
if you've been through trauma, those two books are really powerful. But I think Waking the Tiger is the one that kind of gives people the direction of healing, whereas The Body Keeps the Score just kind of gives you the perspective. If that makes sense.
Sure. Wow.
So yeah, those are what, 7 books that we've talked about today?
I think we both had a couple of the same, so it's probably like five
Yeah,
or six.
I suppose. Yeah, 5 or 6. Yeah. So coherence, uh, 12 Rules for Life, The Body Keeps the Score, Waking the Tiger, It Takes What It Takes,
Start with why.
and Start with Why. So those if you haven't looked into those books, you can absolutely find all of them on my Amazon list. I'll put a link in the description for that. Check them out, read them. Really, you're not going to go wrong if you read any of them, even if you don't have issues with trauma or anything like that, because you
You'll
might be able
find
to use them
value.
to help people.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I mean that's kind of all we got, right?
Yeah. And like you said, well, I'm gonna kind of paraphrase it in a sense, but even if you're not interested in these kind of books, they will provide you some value to help someone.
Right. Absolutely. I 100% agree. Well, if you want to join my inspirational text platform, I'm gonna promote that real quick. And if you want, like sometimes I pose different questions as to, what our next podcast is going to be about, and I might answer your questions. So if you want a chance to feature your question, go ahead and text your question. Text anything. You can just say hi if you want, to 1-608-336-4480. That will be in the description. You can just go ahead and text. It doesn't matter. But that's all we got. Kyle, do you have anything else?
Honestly, no. This was good.
All right. Hopefully this was a shorter episode. I wasn't paying attention to time. But
I'm not even taking a look at it. So,
guys, thanks for joining us today. This week's episode was fun. An absolute pleasure to have you join us, and join us for next week. We should be talking with a special guest next week. I'm really excited. Some of you guys, if you've been following my Instagram, have seen her before. We've had a conversation. It wasn't long enough, so we got to continue that. Really excited to see her again. So pay attention for next week, and we'll see you on the Dylan Experience. Yeah, boy.
Let's get it.